All right, it's 6 o'clock on Thursday, June 9th. I'm going to call to order the Finance, Personnel, and Operations Committee of the Portland Public Schools. I'm Adam Burke, chair of the committee, and the record can show that members Yusuf and Chair Figdor are also present. Tonight, we're going to review, or we're going to have a preview looking at some of the ESSERF funds that remain for the district, and allocations for those funds and what's remaining in preparation for our meeting on June 21st at the business meeting. And we're also going to review some changes in personnel, looking forward to kind of make improvements to our structures to best support the district. And with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Adam. So what I wanted to walk through with you today is I've had conversations with you, and I want to make sure that, like I've captured the essence of what it is that we are looking to cover at the meeting on the 21st. And, if not, we obviously have some time to make adjustments to it. So that's my primary objective today. And then, to update you on where we are with the organization, organizational structure changes, particularly around finance. So that's the agenda for today. So let me share my screen. You guys see my screen? Okay, to slide.
Yes, I see your screen. I'll just also note that it seems that Chair Figdor is back. I think there was a connection issue for a minute.
Okay, awesome. So this is the outline for the workshop as I understand it. So this is checking for accuracy on this. We will come to you with how much money we received in overall in federal funding, and how much has been spent and on what. So that's the first piece of what we expect to bring. And then we're going to, the other two pieces are sort of related to each other. They're all related to each other. So, the first one is documenting what commitments we've made for FY23, so for this next school year and beyond. So we'll, we've got in the slides that are coming, I'll show you some of that, but then we still have some additional things that I just want to preview today, but that will be a part of what we're presenting on the 21st. And then, what was highlighted as something that we wanted to do, but we did not include in the budget, in the general fund budget for FY23. So we'll walk through that, and that's been fairly documented, and when you see it, it'll you'll recall it, because it's stuff that we've done, and we still need to tweak it because some things actually were done that are on that list, and so we'll have to do some adjustments to it. But just in terms of for today, we just wanted to sort of download the basic slides for that. And then, how much does that leave us in to begin a discussion? I don't, from my perspective, I don't expect that we're going to finish that discussion on June 21st, but, to discuss the process for making decisions around those funds. So that's the way that I'm envisioning the workshop on the 21st. So I guess before I move into some of the specifics, is this outline, does that make sense? Is that consistent with what we've talked about? And, is there something that we're missing in here?
Yeah, I'll start us off, just since the conversation, I think, lived primarily between you and I, Superintendent, and then look to others. But the only question I have in seeing this, first of all, it does represent what we've talked about in terms of how to look at what's remaining and what it doesn't address to me is where the decision points are. Particularly, as I've said to you, my interest is to try to finalize commitments for staffing for the FY23 school year that are going to be ESSER funded, but before the board breaks for July. So I'm just not sure if there's enough money that those, the priorities that were unfunded are just going to be covered, and you're recommending we move that forward if you're looking for feedback, or if we need to take votes or anything. So any clarity around that process would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to think if it would make sense to just answer that. Let's actually get into the what is committed for FY23, and then we'll try to answer that question in the context of what is committed for 23, and then what is, what we could potentially spend it on that is already sort of visible to the board and something that we've already talked about through the budget process.
Okay. And before you move on, I just want to pause to allow other members of the committee to voice any reactions to that outline.
That works for me.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
We're good.
And I see that Kathy has joined us as well. So hi, Kathy. So these are the commitments that we made for this previous year that were 1 year only commitments. So these are the things that we agreed to fund this this year that is coming to an end now, but are not in the budget going forward. And so I'm sorry, some of these are in the budget going forward. You will see those in the next slide. So for example, dedicated, I'm going to mess this up. Is dedicated subs, this is the dedicated subs that were 1 year only. So these dedicated subs are not going forward, but we do have dedicated subs that are in the next slide. Sorry about that. Okay. And then, things like the ed tech, the garden ed tech positions, which I know there's, significant interest in and so on, that those were in the budget this year and not in the budget. They're not commitments that we've made for next year. So that's what this
Superintendent.
Yes.
Just because there's some confusion in the community, can I pause you on the garden ed techs? They're not in our local budget. They were in our budget with use of ESSER funds for the current school year, correct?
That's correct. That's what this represents. So these were in the ESSERF budget this year, but we didn't put them in the general fund budget. They're not a part of the commitments that we believe we need to move forward and open the school year. But they are documented as things that are, that aren't in the budget, that could be in the budget as part of the, the third bullet in our, in our plan. So they would be what was highlighted during the lead up that is not in the budget for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that's what this is. I'm not going to go through it one by one, but, and we're still doing work to make sure that we have this all fully documented, but this is, a good, solid approximation of things that were in the budget and we don't expect to continue for next year. Okay, so then these are the things that these are some of the things, and this is what I want to make sure that I talk about before we move on to that third point. So these are the things that we envision continuing into the following year. And there's still work that we're doing around this, but things like the dedicated subs, these are 2 subs in each of our schools to be able to be the first level of support when somebody is absent, and when not, be an additional resource that's available to support specific activities at the school level. So this is, something that we started, not this year, but the previous year. and that we intend to continue. Some of this we believe, and we're still in the process of documenting that, it offsets our substitute costs, because just on its face, every time that there's two people absent in a building, those folks are the first subs that are called in. So that, allows us to have some, savings, but, we're not 100% sure that that's playing out the way that it is intended, but that in theory is the way that that exists. We're still doing some work around the nursing for next year, to make sure that this, we don't think that it's 5.7 FTE, but the amount we believe is close to right. So by next week, we'll have, a cleaned up version of that. There are a couple of adult ed positions that we approved continuing to fund through through ESSERF for the coming year, rather than putting them into the general fund budget, because they're justifiable under the rules of ESSERF, and they continue to be needed. The vaccination bonus is really just a small amount for the purposes of, any sort of stragglers that we give, that we fund for a second booster and things along those lines. And, the summer school coordinator position, which we committed to for 2 years, in the same way that we have, an additional 2 years committed for for summer school. So, and we're going to talk about those things in a minute, but these are the positions that we've committed for the next budget year, and what that all totals up to in the aggregate for last year and this year. So this is the grand total of everything that was on the first slide, everything that is on this slide for the portion that is FY22, as well as the portion that is FY23. So that's the 6.2 million. Kathy, anything you want to add to that?
Nope, I think that's fine.
Okay. Questions? I will let you know that I'm going to see if I can do this.
Mr. Youssef, any questions?
Okay, now I can see you all.
Not for now, thank you. Sure.
Oh, okay. And Chair Figdor, any questions? We'll presume not. I'm okay too, Superintendent.
All right, good. So, so this is a little trickier, and Kathy, maybe we can start with you walking us through, and is this one I have more trouble with. It has more numbers.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, so the first column of numbers on the left, the preliminary budget, that's what we have provided initially to the state. And actually, it's not what we initially provided to the state. We've provided to the state pretty broad categories of projects. And then they came back to us and they said, we think it would be helpful if you did break out your nursing services, your outdoor spaces, even your vaccination bonuses. We'd like that broken out from your total grant to really get a little bit more granular as to what exactly you're using your funding for. So this is kind of the last iteration of what we sent to them. We've spent, as we'll talk about as we go through this, a little bit more, and there are additional items that are added as we progress through this that are being added to the ESSERF 3 budget. And so we will need to go back and revisit with the state when we're done with our forums and everything to right size this a little bit. But as it stands, we have an approximately $18 million award. This is how this is currently broken down. And so then we were trying to look at a projection based on the requests that have been sent through and approved for the grant. It doesn't mean that all of this has already been spent or will be spent, but these are the requests that came through. So based on last year's summer programming, we said we'd probably spend approximately $2.5 million a year. And we projected this through for a couple of years for FY22 and FY23, that we would be for FY23 and FY24, we would be spending roughly $5 million for summer programming. FY22 for salary and benefits, those are all going through ESSERF 2 because we still have some money available for that. So for ESSERF 2, we're spending our payroll costs are going through ESSERF 2, and then our other, like our community partner contracts and those types of other non-personnel expenses are going through ESSERF 3. So there's probably going to be some extra there. This is very conservative. We just want to make sure we have enough reserved for what we said we wanted to do. So the learning recovery has to be at least 20% of your total award. So right now we have that in the summer programming line, and it's about 28%. So we kind of reserved that to meet the requirements of the grant at $5 million out of the 18 for summer programming. We called it fall reopening back in the fall when we were starting to gear up to make sure we had enough staffing in place. The state has asked us to refer to that as a safe return to in-person instruction. So as we've added requests for staffing to get us fully staffed as we came back into the on-site for on-site learning, we have that request. That $6.2 million is the original, what we just showed you in requests for salary and benefits. And then what we've received for non-salary and benefit items, $667,000, has been requested for non-salary and benefit costs. So you can see we're a little bit over from what we initially projected as being enough to actually build on the safe return to schooling. We said pretty much 6.9 million, and we're a little bit over that. So we'll tweak some areas. We said we were going to reserve 275,000 for vaccination bonuses. When we did that, we thought it was just the first round of vaccines. And so that seemed like more than enough. But now with the boosters and everything too, we've continued to reward those who have been vaccinated. So this is pretty much our current request now. We're up to like 304,000 that we spent on that. And then our outdoor spaces, we just, they said, give us a guesstimate. So we estimated 450,000 for that. We estimated 700,000 for nursing, not really knowing exactly what was going to be coming through for that. To date, we've had 158,000 requests come through for outdoor space. Just building that out with picnic tables, various equipment and supplies. We've had about 120,000 come through. Part of that is contracted services for nursing staff for elementary and secondary in the amount of about 121,000. And we said for grant reporting purposes, grant management and reporting, we actually have a dedicated contracted temporary who is helping us with managing the grants and the flow of data and the requests that come through. Would be approximately 150,000. We think that'll be closer to maybe 200,000 for the reporting. And that's come through as those requests. So in total, we're trying to get to a number that we think will be available. The balance of all of this was put into a social emotional recovery category. And that's where the 4.3 million comes in. There's nothing specific at this time that relates to that, but that's where we put the balance of it. So with your salary and benefits of 9.6 million requests that are projected, with your 3.1 million for non-salary and benefits, that would be about 12.7 that's been requested out of the 18 million, leaving us with approximately 5 million of what we're considering uncommitted funds, just so that we have enough in the other categories as we progress through it. And then to the right, actuals, we've just given you what has been actually spent through April. We're not quite closed for the month of May, so we have to still post some payrolls through. So we're giving you the actuals through the end of April, and we've spent 3.6 million. But a lot of this, most of this, as you can see, is salary and benefits in ESSERF 3, whereas ESSERF 2 was more project related and not as many salary and benefit related costs are going through ESSERF 2. ESSERF 3 is mostly salary and benefits. So when these folks have been hired in and how long we're trying to project out, that's based on the projected of how long, if the request positions have been requested. This will reflect how many we've actually hired in and we're still paying for. So that's what the actual piece shows. So the notes are saying that we continue to add items that change the preliminary project budget, is tweaking between categories. And we just need to ensure that additional items that were planned for spending are taken into consideration and accurately estimated before we update. We want to do that before we update the budget application with the state. So we met the initial deadline for applying for the funds. The categories, there's some, obviously some tweaking that needs to be done, and that's very much permissible for them. They just said you need to make sure that you've selected the correct allowable uses for each project so that these costs will be able to be submitted for reimbursement.
Thanks, Kathy. Lots of information. I think I'm understanding it. Mr. Youssef, do you have any questions right now?
Thank you, Chair. Kathy, can you just clarify a little bit about the social emotional, the 4.3 million you said
So after we estimated how much we would need for all the other categories, we put the balance into social emotional recovery.
Okay.
So that is, Mr. Youssef, that's in essence, think of it as a placeholder for for all of the things that we need to do that we have not, that we haven't done, that are, tied into, sort of advancing the work of the district, as opposed to the things that we needed to do to get ourselves, through a year of in-person instruction. Now, some of the activities that we've done have social emotional value, but this line itself is untouched and available for use going forward.
Oh. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And I'm going to slide us back for a minute because I just wanted to make a couple of points here that I forgot. So I guess one is this 6.2 here is the 6.2 that you see here, right? So I think it's, so even though this is not fully spent at this time, if you look at that, there's there's 1.5 million that is expected to be spent next year. So, again, there's 3 million left. 1.5 of that theoretically is going to be spent. And then, we don't know exactly what this number is going to close the year out, but it presumably will be, less in aggregate than what was originally budgeted for that, just because positions were not. So my point is there's going to be additional money in this column once this is all, recorded for the year, right? So I think that's one point that I wanted to make. And then I had also pointed out that there are a number of things that we have envisioned for next year that we will be presenting at the meeting on the 21st. Things like the additional positions for finance that, we talked with this group about back in, May. So those positions that are added, somewhere in the neighborhood of $150,000, that, that will be in what we're proposing. We also have a significant investment in sort of retooling our our behavioral health support system that Assistant Superintendent Nally has been working with our social workers and counselors on, that we will also have documented. That is not in here. There are some adjustments to our transportation staffing that we've made looking forward to next year that we will also include in here. So this number is not our final number for next, or I guess this number is not our final number for next year. That will be higher than that based on those types of investments. But just want to make sure that I was supposed to talk about that when I went through this, and I forgot that we were going to do that.
Thanks for backing up. That was helpful for me.
And that's, what you see here, behavioral mental health, including the finance department staffing increases, things along those lines that we're still in the process of adding and fully documenting. Okay. Anything else on this before we move to just like what is the third bullet here is what was highlighted during the lead up to the FY23 budget that was unfunded and now, is fully quantified. Because those are things that, to your original question, Chair Burke, around like, what are the decision points? This is where I think the decision points begin. So
great. I'm ready to proceed. Mr. Youssef or Chair Figdor, anybody need to pause before we move forward? No? Okay, onward.
Okay, so these are the things that were, and again, Malia's actually documented those, and I meant to go back and delete the ones that have already been implemented, that we implemented through the budget process or we implemented through a grant and things along those lines. But those are not, I did not do that. So they're still showing up here, and I may recognize them when we get to them, but I'm not sure that I will. So, and Kathy, if you do, please, just let me know. But these
have our grace tonight, and we know you'll have it cleaned up for the 21st.
Yeah. So these are the consultation and intervention services in our student support services department that were proposed, and then in the end we did not include. So you see, what those are. These are district program staff. So these are for the special ed, self-contained programs, things that we had again teed up that were requested through our department head there that were not, in the budget. And so, like the social work, this is one that we actually did include. So those are already in the FY23 budget. So those next week will be out of this, equation.
Chair Figdor has her hand raised.
Sorry, and sorry that I missed this, but Superintendent, are you saying that all of what's not included would be included for consideration for federal funding?
Yeah, that's the decisions that the board needs to make, and that's one of the. So one of the questions that my discussions with Chair Burke that we talked about, and we actually did this through the budget process as well, is to say that some of these things could be considered for federal funding when we get to this part, after the budget is approved, which it isn't yet, but hopefully it will be next Tuesday. That this is the next step, is to figure out how to use our federal funding, and that's where we'll need to weigh if you do it, how would we fund it going forward? What are the priorities? All of that conversation, for the board to have is the next step. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So world language, the Chinese language, position, the middle school language immersion, the dual identified special ed and ELL students, some additional pre-K support, an additional FTE for SLIFE, and school-based language supports. And then, we've never quite documented this, but, there are some material costs that we didn't fund for immersion and heritage language resources at the schools. And then the mobile makerspace teacher, that's one that we've funded through a grant. So this one won't be on the list. The ELA teacher leader, again, funded through a grant, so won't be on the list. And then the garden teachers, which we will have sort of a more in-depth look at that particular issue during the meeting on the 21st, where Katie West has been working with, with community advocates and partners on this issue. And, it's not garden ed techs, it's actually, teacher positions to be able to do the work that's envisioned for the garden teacher positions. So those are the items that we had discussed during the budget process as things that were potential priorities that we did not have, that we decided not to put into the budget for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is we wanted to keep the budget, the increase, at a level that we felt was appropriate for the circumstances, and recognizing, and we all heard this throughout the budget process from, the council, that, that we have this substantial amount of federal funding and can use some of that to advance some of this work. So I think that that's the context in which we made the decision to sort of table these items and bring them back up at this time. So those are the items that we have. And then, so I'll pause and see if you have any questions about these specifically before we go to the fourth point.
For me, it's just a process question. You said the slide would actually be updated next week. Is that something you could circulate once it's updated? So, I guess presumably you'll have it as part of the board meeting materials, but if you had it sooner, it'd be helpful to me as I'm just working through this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else from the committee? No. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So then, to the question that, that you asked at the beginning, Chair Burke, about, the decision points. For me, the list that we just went through is a key decision point. And then, the next decision point is there's, if you funded all of that, which I'm not saying that we will or that we should, but if you funded all of that, there is still going to be, a significant amount of federal funding that is left. And so, what is the process for allocating that? What are other priorities that surfaced? And I'll, use one that was, very visible through the budget process where, board member Youssef advocated for adding additional positions to bolster the work that we're doing in Make It Happen. And, we had a long conversation about that, and also, heard the real need that the program staff identified around middle school Make It Happen, which, in the context of everything that we've been dealing with, since the protests, seems, like it would have been great to have, for a number of years. So I think that, that to me is an additional conversation that we need to have, is like, what are some other board priorities that you've identified that we need to have a process around and make decisions about? And then, obviously we've talked about a participatory budgeting process that can be an overlay for all of this, right? It can be the way that we make decisions about those items that are in the budget, that we've highlighted and aren't funded, as well as things like the Make It Happen, the Make It Happen positions, as well as what are additional things that, that as a Portland Public Schools community, we want to advance using federal funds. And so, I think having a conversation about what would a participatory budget process look like, with what remains after we allocate all of these funds, I think is also a part of what we need to begin to do at the meeting on the 21st.
Okay, that's helpful. Chair Figdor?
One thing I want to make sure we do is that we learn from other communities that have successfully used participatory budgeting. I know Dr. Ahmed was working on a project regarding participatory budgeting, and I'm just wondering if there are recommendations that we can take from the work that he's done, and if it's possible to see that work prior to our meeting, so we can familiarize ourselves with it.
Yeah, I can include that in the meeting materials. We don't have his final paper yet. He's finishing it, but we will get that shortly. And we do have his preliminary paper that we can include. And then, what I was thinking is we would do a summary of what that is, for the presentation on the 21st. So that there is, sort of that as a jumping in point for how to think about a participatory budgeting process.
Great. And my understanding, which is by no means complete or no means thorough, but my understanding is that typically participatory budgeting processes utilize much smaller pots of money than what we have access to in terms of these overall pots of money. And so from my perspective, like I want to make sure we're setting the community up for success, that there's a big role that the community can have in determining, helping to brainstorm and develop and propose projects, but I also want it to be a successful process. And so I think bifurcating it where we have priorities developed by you, superintendent, and your team, and there might be some board priorities that we deal with those separate from a public process. And I think we have sufficient money to do that. So that's my initial thought. And I will definitely dive back into the resources I have about participatory budgeting prior to our workshop on the 21st.
Thanks, Chair Figdor. Member Youssef, any comments or questions?
Does the participatory budget approximately, like, I just want to learn more. How much do we spend around, just estimation and overall? The previous years, just something like gives me a little bit idea.
I think, it really does depend, but, sort of $1 million, something like that would probably make sense for us to do if we're doing just sort of an open process. But I also think there's a way to have a more open participatory process around making decisions around some of the budget priorities that are currently in there. I think, to Chair Figdor's point, I think, there are a number of things that we are advancing that I'm not bringing them to the board as, for decisions, but rather these are the things like the continuation of the subs, the operation, the finance positions, things along those lines are, necessary for a number of reasons. And, so those are going to be in there. So I think, our needs and, sort of priorities are already included in that second bullet. And so, then there are the things that aren't included in that second bullet that we've talked about, wanting to be able to do. And those are those 3 slides that we walked through. And so, even when you do all of that, there is still, a significant amount of money left over. And that's where decisions can be made about how do you allocate those monies. But I guess my point is, like, on those things that are in the budget process, you can do a participatory process around those and sort of, saying, what are the ones that we're willing to advance, even though we know we won't be able to continue into the future. So those are that is the other part of the participatory process, which would, be up over $1 million.
Thank you so much. Yes.
I'm sorry. From what I know, and it's limited, is that, we can differentiate between participatory budgeting and like participatory grant making as being 2 things that could be relevant here. And the participatory budgeting, I'd say, the one end of the spectrum is that it's like fully imaginative. It's like, what if you could do anything, what would you do? And then try to put some numbers to that and place it. And you can put constraints on it to be like, it needs to be one-time costs, not ongoing things, but it could start from truly any idea that came out at that moment. The grant making end of the spectrum would be that you have specific proposals that essentially a group of people or the community is reviewing and voting up or prioritizing. And those would already have, like, pretty developed ideas and budgets and that sort of thing attached to it. And I think that's part of what we'll have to figure out is where we are in that spectrum. And the numbers for me, based on what I know, is like 500,000 to $1 million, somewhere in that range. It might be what we're looking at. And Chair Figdor, I saw you were about to say something too. Sorry.
No, I think what I think my thoughts are consistent with both what the superintendent is saying and what you're saying, Chair Burke. So, I look forward to this process because it's not, we don't typically have an opportunity to have the public help generate ideas and then help make decisions about them. So I just want to make sure that it's structured in a way where it's genuinely allowing people to participate and people of all types, that we're not creating barriers or hurdles or biases in who can participate. But at the same time, it's a process that we're able to move through, so that we don't get bogged down and we can actually get this money to the priorities that the community is identifying as needed, because my guess is that some of them are fairly urgent, as well as the reality of that we only have so much time to spend this money.
Yeah, if I may, to you, Chair Figueroa and Mr. Youssef, I'd like to kind of straw poll you or get your reaction. I'm all in favor of the participatory budgeting. It's something that I'm interested in, I'm excited in, and I want to acknowledge its constraints in terms of the human capacity it's going to take to make it happen and the duration of time that it would probably happen over. And I, as I said at the top of the call, I do feel urgency to make some commitments to staffing before we go out on June, both so that we don't lose people we already have and so that we have time in our hiring process, because we had a number of unfilled positions, or they took, I don't know the numbers, but they took a duration of time to fill into the school year. And I don't want to be in that position if there's things that we either know are a priority, for any reason, whether it's because of a critical need or otherwise. So I just want to get your reaction of are you each in support of trying to move forward on the 21st and to arrive at some decisions on those things on items 3 and maybe 4, like the make it happen coordinator, something that's already been identified and maybe worked through individually ahead of that meeting, so that we can get some decisions as a body on the 21st, or let me shorten this up. Sorry. Are you interested in driving quickly to some decisions in some areas on the 21st so we can get some things in place and then also doing the participatory budgeting? Or is your temperature more you would prefer to put most all of those items in 3 and 4 into participatory budgeting?
I prefer the first option of moving quickly so that we're able to make some decisions now. I think the participatory budgeting process is going to take some time, and maybe more time than we're recognizing. Although I do think that we need to be cognizant of our staff resources and ensure that we're devising a process that is not going to that is reasonable and given all of the demands on our staff. I would prefer to make a set of decisions now. We're in the situation where we have enough funds to have leave a robust amount of money for participatory budgeting. In fact, as I alluded to earlier, I think, the numbers I've seen have been much smaller than kind of even what we're talking about. So I feel comfortable. I feel comfortable moving ahead, knowing that we can still have a robust participatory budgeting process.
Thank you.
Let's.
One moment, Superintendent. I think Mr. Youssef was going to speak.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Superintendent. I think it will make more clear to me.
No. I actually, I think you need to, because I was going to get into process, stuff. So if you have, I think your opinion in terms of asserting, I think what Mr. Burke and Ms. Figueroa have said, where your head is with respect to that, and then I can talk a little bit about my process question.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, I overall agree with that we made that decision, but I'm not very clear with certain area. Are we making the decisions, or that's a little bit is not clear to me. What are the areas that we are focusing now that we know that decision being made, and then we go the participatory?
Yeah, we're working through some ambiguity for sure. So your lack of clarity is right on for where we are.
I think that was that was going to be my question. And Kathy, I would love to just also understand, from the, grant side, what are the constraints that we have going forward? So, first on the sort of board process side, we're talking about something that is being presented in a workshop. And so we don't normally make decisions in workshops. So those are informational leading to decisions subsequently. So I'm just trying to think about what is what is the sort of the agenda going to look like, where items that are, sort of decisions about allocation of resources are made, given that we're at this point envisioning it as a information building workshop. And then Kathy, related to that, I know how sort of tricky this stuff is at the grant level. So what do you think we need to have in place in order to be able to legitimately claim, things that are in our, on this list, towards the grant, and what kind of, board action is necessary, and what's the timing and all of that kind of stuff.
So timing, I think we've met the initial deadline for the application. So I think the only thing that they've talked to us about at the state level is that they have to meet, any expenses that we meet have to meet two major criteria. One being that it does need to be pandemic related. There's a lot of this, it's a pretty broad, that's pretty broad, but they always keep coming back to that it does in some way need to be pandemic related, and it does need to meet the allowable uses that are requirements of the grant. And I do have some of that here as to like what the allowable uses are. There are quite a few, but whatever project that you have, it has to, the allowable uses, it has to encompass the appropriate allowable uses so that we can spend the money under that particular project. So I can share that too, what those allowable uses are right now. And I think when we broadly applied, we pretty much hit every allowable use that was available so that we'd cover all our bases. But I think we have to narrow that down a little bit. But we in our last discussion, we did, talk about like deadlines. Are we still within our deadlines for spending funds? And they said, yes, you just have to make sure that you've selected the appropriate allowable uses so that you can spend the money within those guidelines. And again, it's supposed to be COVID pandemic related. So we forget that piece sometimes.
But that's also broadly, can be revenue replacement for resources that are not available because of the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very broad. This particular one, ESSERF 3, does give you a lot of latitude in what you can spend things for. And we run things,
May I float a proposal to you, Superintendent?
Yeah, can I just ask real quick one thing, just still related to the grant, is that what is the public engagement and governance approval that's required, for adding things to the grant?
So they just we need to show what our process is, and it has to be made public. So whatever we decide to do has to be publicly made available publicly.
Yeah. Okay.
And that has to be, it's usually posted on your website. So it has to be on the website, and we have to, in order to qualify for the funding, before we can get reimbursed, we have to prove that we did have some type of participatory budgeting process.
Public participation encompassing
all the, all the stakeholders.
Yeah. just wanted to differentiate between the participatory budgeting that we were also discussing a minute ago, which was a different kind of process.
Yes.
Yeah. So my proposal, Superintendent, is because of the constraints of our meetings, and this one being the last one, if essentially you took the slides that we have and all those items that were on the proposed but not funded, plus the make it happen middle school positions, and they were basically in a spreadsheet, and it says, there's is it pandemic related? Is it an allowable use? And then is it superintendent recommended? That gives us a place to begin our work as a board to either accept your recommendations or modify them through amendment and get to a decision. Otherwise, I think we're left to other less efficient processes, but I'm open to other ideas and your reaction.
I think, the superintendent recommended piece is challenging for me, because I think that is where, I want to do all of them. And I also am super concerned about what happens when we stop doing those because we don't have funding. So I think that's the part that is, really challenging for me. And, I've been, clear about that from the get-go, and we've violated that multiple times in multiple ways. So I think, I think that's my biggest concern with saying that. So I think, I would just across the board, I would say they're all superintendent recommended, but I would also, say this is not sustainable past FY23, so that there's no doubt about the fact that we're recognizing that, by doing this, and that may not be true in all cases. So I think that, for us to sort of look at that as we advance those proposals, I think that is, that makes sense as a process, but that's my biggest concern with it. So that, and just like the time and, energy and all of that to pull it together, but we'll figure it out. And you did say, like, if there were other ideas, so I responded before you actually got any other ideas, but if there are other ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Chair Figdor.
Well, I'll answer that first. It wasn't why I raised my hand, though, which is I'm wondering what other resources we may need now. Like, the budget was conceived and passed prior to the middle school protests. And so I'm wondering, what resources do we understand more now that we could use to help build the student leadership, the social emotional learning, additional pieces that could be valuable. So that would be that's the big question I have.
Yeah.
And then I guess I wonder, Mr. Superintendent, what you see, given that right now this is on our budget, this is on our agenda as a workshop, and given Chair Burke's comments about acting sooner on the identified priorities. I don't know that that's the right word, but that the unfunded, on the identified positions. When do you foresee doing that?
So I was thinking this would all be done in August, but that's not what Chair Burke is suggesting, and I understand his rationale for it, and it's not like something that we haven't thought about. I know, particularly around the garden teachers, that there's a sense of urgency, that there are people that are currently in positions that, if they don't know that those positions are going to continue into the future, would, potentially make decisions, personal decisions about, employment that would be different than if they knew that those positions existed. But aside from that, there are, obviously you can do more if you're making these decisions in June than if you make the decisions in August, right?
I guess I would propose that the board has talked about these different positions at length. I would propose that we put it on our budget, not as a workshop, or we could do a workshop at the beginning of the meeting, and then we have it on our agenda as an action item, and that we act on those set of positions on the 21st.
I'm in favor of that.
And, I'm just going to raise it, and I don't think it's it doesn't mean, that we don't do it. I just think that one of the complexities for the meeting on the 21st is that we're going to have 3 new board members. And so I do think that, sort of preparing those board members in advance for this is going to be part of the, challenge.
And I think Chair Burke could take that on and get that done together. There's 3 is not a big number.
1.5 each.
And Kathy, sort of the board acting on these additions at this point in time, from sort of the grants public process requirements. It would be, obviously we'd have a workshop open to the community. We would have, public participation before the board voted on these positions. It would be posted as an action item, when this goes out. Would that satisfy the requirements? I mean, I don't think we've done more than that on other, on any of the other allocations, as we've, said, like this was part of the board's, public process.
I believe it would, but I'll check with the state.
Yeah.
Make sure that satisfies.
Sounds like we're set up for direction. Just want to look to Mr. Youssef before we close the conversation and move on.
I was just thinking about, are those additional positions tools?
Are the additional positions what?
So I get lost. When we're gonna act on the 21st is gonna be the finance vacant positions.
I think you're cutting out a little bit, and so I'm missing, your question. I know that it's about the 21st and acting on the 21st. Are you asking? Go ahead, try again. Sorry.
Yeah. So what we are talking on the workshop and then acting on it is going to be the additional vacant, the position that we want to add on the finance, right?
Yeah, yes, that. So I think we will have a package of the things that we need to put in place to be able to run the school district next year, right? I think that's going to be a part of, and that's going to be one action item, and that's going to capture the 1.5 million plus whatever else, comes with behavioral health, transportation, and the finance department. And we've asked, senior leaders to identify if there's anything else that we've forgotten, and we need to get that all documented, but that will be part of one action item. And then another one will be capturing all of the 3 slides in the format, in a format similar to what Chair Burke suggested, which is like a spreadsheet with, this is what it is, this is, how many FTEs, this is what the costs associated with it are, this is the superintendent's recommendation, these are the caveats or notes or whatever it is. And then, presenting that as a package for the board to discuss and act on after the workshop during the business meeting as part of a set of action items.
Thank you.
Is that track for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Committee, are we okay to close the discussion about ESSER funds and move to the other piece about operations finance? Yeah. Okay. Onward, Superintendent. Thank you for that conversation, Kathy and Superintendent.
Yeah. Thank you. The next agenda item is the update on the finance department organization. And so a couple of things. One is that, as I know, both Chair Victor and Chair Burke know from, one-on-one conversations that we've had, that Kathy is planning to leave the district effective August 1st. Kathy notified me back in the fall of her intention to resign, but agreed to stay on through the budget process, which she's done, and then some, and has agreed to stay on through August 1st. And then, after August 1st, Kathy is still open to continuing in a consulting fashion to help us transition through the reorganization. And, it goes without saying that I'm incredibly grateful to Kathy for the work that she's done, for her perseverance and her commitment to getting us through what has been a remarkably, incredibly difficult year for everybody across the organization, but, no more so than it has been in her department. And I think that, she helped us to move through a budget that advances our priorities, preserves, and builds on those priorities, while at the same time was reasonable and, in the context of very difficult conversations, was, visibly, supported by the board and subsequently by the council. So, in addition to that, she's helped to shape this restructured and adequately resourced finance department, which I know is incredibly important to her, because I think, one of the things that has weighed on us is like, how can we get this work done? And, part of that is the reorganization and the buttressing of the department with the additional positions. And so I'm just, really grateful to Kathy for that work, and, just wanted to take a moment to, to recognize that as we move into then, so what is the organization going to look like? So.
Yeah, I would just like to echo your gratitude and acknowledgement of all that you've done, Kathy. I mean, it was just doing the work is, here, and some of the aspects that you had to navigate, brought it to here. I'd also like to shout out the innovation of your spreadsheet that we got to play with to understand the impacts of adding positions or moving them and where the funding for those positions went to. So that will be, I think, a Kathy legacy item among others that we now have that spreadsheet. But truly, thank you.
Thank you.
If I can just echo my my thanks and gratitude as well, Kathy. It was a really tough budget. You got us through it with information that was always for the board just very accessible. And I know that you take incredible complexity and you make it something that that as board members we can get our heads around and understand and use the information to probe further in terms of the questions we have. And I know that is no small feat. So I just want to appreciate that, and also your willingness to stay through the transition in a different capacity, helping as we kind of restructure the department. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Kathy.
Thank you.
It has been said all the things that I was thinking about it, and I really appreciate your commitment and your willingness to help us go through this difficult time. And And thanks for going back and back to explain the mill rate. That's an area that I have struggled with to understand. So we are so proud to have you. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you
in
so
good
much.
company because I don't understand it either. So, awesome. So let's then shift a little bit to talking about the organizational structure. And this is, a reboot, revisiting of what we talked about at the last meeting, but there's been some evolution in the way that, the way that this is going, that it's going to impact the organization, which I think is positive. So I just want to walk through this. So are you seeing my screen?
We are.
So this is, a slide that's in your packet, and this is similar to what you saw at the last meeting. So in that particular scenario, we were talking about adding 2 new positions to the department. And, what you see here is really just, sort of a net of 1 additional position, because in the new organizational structure, there is no executive director for budget and finance. And instead, that position is, and the actual job description is listed in the, LinkedIn in the agenda. We create a chief operating officer position, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But in this conception of the department, there are 2 director level positions that all of the remaining staff in the department report into those directors. So that's the controller position and the budget director, which is not a new position, although it is a new role, because what we're doing for that is adjusting and repurposing the budget manager position that currently is vacant and existed prior. So that's why that is not a new position. But it is it's a different role. And then we're adding the purchasing manager position and a grant accountant. In addition to this, as you may recall, there are additional resources for grant management for the immediate, that existed last year, that are increased this year and will be a part of the sort of item, the sort of superintendent's recommendation for being able to run school next year, portion of the agenda that we just talked about. So in this new sort of reconfiguration, the position that was the executive director for budget and finance becomes a chief operations officer that oversees the finance department, but also takes over the direct oversight of our operations departments, facilities, food service, and transportation. I'm currently in that role. So those positions, in addition to being chief executive officer, those positions report directly up to me. And as I know I've said to some of you, I think that what this does is it opens up my ability to really be focused on what is happening in our schools, something that has become, very evident that there's gaps in my understanding of what is currently happening in our schools, through the middle school protests, particularly around leadership structures that aren't in place, that should have been in place, that I didn't recognize as missing. And so, changing it's going to allow me to support the work of our principals in ways that right now sits squarely with one person. And, we've started conversations with Aaron and with Malia about a different configuration for that level of support. And so that's where my time that gets freed up from having to do the COO role will move. And I think that, is important for you to understand. It will be important for the community to understand as we move forward. Kathy and her team helped to conceive that role. And, as you saw or you heard earlier, Kathy is going to stay on to help to transition, to execute on the additions to this department and to help with that transition, over the next, 6 months, ideally. And Kathy has not said that she's going to do this for 6 months, but she's open to talking about beyond September. So that's the organizational structure for finance that we're going to be sort of articulating and putting into the ESSERF. And again, this is one where I don't expect that is a ESSERF funded going forward. I think that you heard this at the previous meeting, and I'll be saying this throughout the year. These additional positions need to be in the budget going forward for us to be able to run the finance department effectively.
Any questions or comments, or I'm sorry, Superintendent?
No, just if Kathy, if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the committee? I think I have one. I understand what's been described here, and I appreciate, Kathy, you putting forth effort to help envision kind of how to leave things better than you found it.
Of course.
I think my one question that comes back to the conversations we've had about the audit and kind of the cultural resistance to what we need to also do to move forward. Is there how does this help to address that? I think is the quickest question.
It doesn't if we don't change the culture. So it won't. You can put many people into something, but until you actually change the culture and tighten up some processes, it won't have the impact that we're hoping for.
Yeah, I obviously agree with that. And then I also think that an important part to begin that culture change is sort of validating a narrative that has been, in place that, that the department didn't have the resources that it needed to be able to do the work that it was being asked to do. And so to the extent that we're doing that and, creating a, clear division of responsibilities around the budget versus the accounting aspects of the department, I think are, that's an important step. And then, as Kathy said, continuing to look at process improvements, something that she's started and she's committed to continuing to help us to work through. And that, Kim Kennedy, who we've hired as the controller, who's going to oversee the accounting position, is on board and committed to do. So I think that those are the pieces. But yes, absolutely, that culture change is going to be critical, and I think we're taking steps that are our best effort as we think and see it to try to address that. And the proof will obviously be in the pudding.
Yeah,
but it is exciting, and I'm very hopeful, and I'm heartbroken, I must add. But
oh, you just turned my smile upside down, but all fair. All heard that all those things are true, and appreciate your honesty, and I'm glad the excitement and hope are part of that as well.
All right.
Okay.
And then the last item that I have on the agenda is just to, and I think you all know this, but I just wanted to do it publicly as well, is to comment on the fact that Jane McLucas, our food service director, will be leaving PPS at the end of the month to become the state director of school nutrition. And so, she'll, in that capacity, she'll be responsible for overseeing state and federal school nutrition programs for all of Maine. And Jane has done tremendous work over the past 7 years to improve access and the quality of our school meals. And she's been an incredibly energetic partner, to all of us in the district, but also to community organizations that are committed to making, nutritious and high quality food accessible to students and families. So I'm incredibly happy for Jane. This is obviously, a career, move that is really, something that she wanted to do and that I 100% support. And I'm sad for PPS. So.
Heard, and I think that says that. Anything from the committee? Okay. So that's all the items on the agenda? Okay. Anything else from the committee before we close for the evening? No. I think it sounds like tonight might be the last finance committee meeting that you're part of, Kathy. Maybe there'll be one in August, but maybe not. So I just want to acknowledge that. And I hope, we're happy to continue saying what we said earlier tonight and while you're with us in other ways. But I do just want to catch myself to not take for granted that this might be the last finance committee together.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, honestly.
Thank you, Kathy.
And I appreciate all the support that I've seen.
Thank you again.
I hope I see you again.
Yeah.
Definitely still the 21st. So.
Yeah, definitely the 21st.
Definitely the 21st.
Till August, and it sounds like we're working on 6 months after that too. So
All right.
We got some runway. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for a good meeting. We covered a lot, and we had good conversation. I think it set us up well for some important decisions coming up. And yeah, again, thank you, superintendents. Thank you, Kathy, for the work that particularly we just walked through and all that went into trying to do some reorganization that's really going to be meaningful to support the district in a critical time. So thank you for that work amongst all the work that never ends that's around. Okay.
Thank you all.
Okay.
I think I can just close the meeting is what I learned in one of our conversations with council. We don't even have to take a vote. So see you later. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.